the first piece of major gun safety legislation in decades, and we sent it to President Biden's desk.
So I thought that was very interesting that now we have an unelected swamp creature, a bureaucrat, who thinks that they can now make felons.
We are taking action. We are getting things done, and we are trying to save lives.
Not only has it been completely blown out of proportion.
The ATF, before they abolish our Second Amendment rights, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
$1.9 billion to law-abiding citizens.
Bump stock case. The cases concerning former President Donald Trump have dominated the Supreme Court's recent attention, but the justices also heard oral arguments on a topic that attracted widespread notice in 2017. In a lawsuit to decide whether rifles with bump stock should be classified as mash guns, the court grappled with how to interpret the National Rifle Act of 1934, which has a vague definition of the term. This debate took place on February 28. Bump stocks, which the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives defines as devices that allow a semi-auto arm to shoot more than one shot with a single pull of the trigger, were used in the 2017 Las Vegas mass slaying. The concept of trigger differed between the parties in Garland versus Cargill. Justice Brent Kavanaugh bemoaned, "That's the language we're stuck with," admitting that the legislation was first enacted in reaction to gang crime during the Prohibition era. A bump stock is designed to capture the energy released when an arm pulls its first trigger, enabling the arm to fire continually without the user having to pull the trigger after the first shot. The ATF deliberated on a specific bump stock called the Atkins Accelerator in 2002. The ATF concluded that because the Atkins Accelerator required many pushes of the trigger to fire, the Bureau was not permitted to regulate it under the 1934 Act. But in 2006, the ATF re-examined their decision and declared bump stocks such as the Atkins Accelerator to be mash guns. Since then, a variety of bump stocks have been developed, resulting in multiple ATF rulings from 2008 to 2017, excluding them from the classification as mash guns. Bump stocks were reclassified as mash guns by the ATF under the Trump administration following the incident at the Las Vegas Music Festival, which claimed 60 lives, making it the bloodiest mass slaying in American history. As a result of the ruling, owners of bump stocks face criminal penalties if they fail to destroy or return the devices by March 26, 2019. When the decision took effect in 2019, Central Texas Arm Works owner Michael Cargill filed a challenge. A federal district judge upheld the ATF's position, arguing that the decision adheres to the best reading of the relevant statute.
I get it. My Republican friends are going to complain about the process.
$1.9 billion to law-abiding citizens.
Our right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I yield back.
Not only has it been completely blown out of proportion.
This is the last day before the district work period.
And every conservative in this Congress to stand with Representative Clyde and his legislation and to stand with me.
There's a hearing that you can't be at, your counsel can't be present, you haven't been charged with the crime.
According to Kelly Roscom, Director of Law and Policy at the Johns Hopkins Center for Armed Crime Solutions, the case is about whether or not the ATF has the authority to promulgate this rule, not whether or not it is constitutional under the Second Amendment to regulate bump stock. Roscom stated this in an interview with Medill News Service. On behalf of Attorney General Merrick Garland and the federal government, Attorney Brian Fletcher contended before the Supreme Court that those weapons do exactly what Congress meant to prohibit when it enacted the prohibition on mash guns. In light of the Las Vegas shooting, Fletcher insisted that it would be irresponsible for the ATF to ignore its earlier ruling that bump stocks were not mash weapons. Cargill's case was based on the trigger's back-and-forth motion between rounds and the need for human assistance to continue firing. Garland's argument, on the other hand, was based on the technicality that after the first shot, the shooter is no longer actively pulling the trigger, starting a continuous cycle of firing. Siding with Garland, the U.S. Appeals Court for the Fifth Circuit determined that Congress purposely left out the trigger finger movement while drafting the act. Shortly thereafter, Cargill filed an appeal with the Supreme Court. The tool that starts a weapon's firing is called a trigger. During oral arguments, Jonathan Mitchell, the Cargill attorney, stated that a bump stock does not alter the trigger in any manner. Ketanji Brown, the Judge Jackson persistently probed Mitchell, focusing on Congress's intentions. Jackson questioned, why would Congress want to forbid certain actions based only on whether the trigger is moving as opposed to certain actions that can result in this kind of fatal spray of bullets? Although the mechanism may be different, Jackson and Justice Elena Kagan both insisted that a mash gun and a semi-auto arm with a bump stock have the same capacity. A weapon that fires a multitude of shots with a single human action is what this statute comprehends, Kagan said. At some point, you have to apply a little bit of common sense to the way you read a statute. Still, Mitchell insisted there was a distinction between the purpose of mash guns and bump stocks. Mitchell answered, it has a very high rate of fire, but it's not automatically fired. The possession and transfer of bump stocks are prohibited, and this prohibition will not change even if the government wins in court. In the event that the court rules in favor of Cargill, bump stocks will remain legal for Americans to own and purchase unless new legislation is passed by Congress or state legislatures. The ATF lacks the authority to criminalize something that wasn't previously illegal. Breaking the law is not illegal, according to Fletcher. Violating the statute has always been and will continue to be illegal.
My speech is well beyond the 2 minutes that I'm allotted, so I'm just going to dispense with the notes, really.
We are taking action. We are getting things done, and we are trying to save lives.
At the firearm industry. That is all this is and nothing more.
Contrast that with what Republicans did to address gun violence and crime the last time they were in charge.
The impulsive leaders at ATF have once again failed to apply simple logic and reason to their decision-making.
Their answer to gun violence is more guns. And if that's not enough, even more guns.
Which changes now we have an administration that is desperate to erode our Second Amendment rights.
Trump-era bump stock ban. The Supreme Court said that it will rule whether or not to preserve a ban on bump stocks, which are devices that enable semi-auto rifles to shoot more quickly. The prohibition was enacted during the Trump administration, after a gunman who was armed with a bump stock slayed approximately 60 people and injured hundreds of others at a music festival that took place on the Las Vegas Strip in 2017. The rule was finally implemented by the administration of President Trump. It is still the most horrifying mass slaying in the history of the United States. There were around 520,000 bump stocks sold across the country before owners were compelled to hand them over, according to estimates provided by federal officials. On many occasions in the past, the Supreme Court, which is dominated by conservatives, consistently declined to overturn lower rulings regarding the devices. Nevertheless, in light of the fact that the nation's courts are becoming increasingly divided on the matter, the justices, in a brief order that was not signed, consented to hear an appeal from the Biden administration that defended the rule. The case is scheduled to be considered during this term, and a decision is anticipated to be handed down by the end of June. It does nothing more than bring the matter of arms to the attention of the Supreme Court, which was already on the docket of the judges. Arguments about the constitutionality of a federal armed possession ban for those who are subject to domestic crime restraining orders will be presented to the Supreme Court. Watchers of the Supreme Court are keeping a careful eye on that case to determine whether or not the conservative majority will modify its historic opinion from the previous year, which provided the most significant expansion of rights under the Second Amendment in a decade. The bump stock lawsuit, on the other hand, does not directly involve the Second Amendment in any circumstance. Instead, the question is whether or not the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, which was established during the Trump administration, may control bump stocks by classifying them as mash guns, as the term is defined by federal law. The transfer and possession of mash guns has been prohibited by Congress for a considerable amount of time. The case revolves around the question of whether or not rifles that are equipped with bump stocks meet the criteria of firing automatically more than one shot by a single function of the trigger. According to the paperwork submitted to the court by the Department of Justice, the interpretive rule did not alter or enlarge the scope of the statutory prohibition on possessing or transferring new mesh guns. The rule, on the other hand, served no purpose other than inform the public of the ATF's considered view that bump stocks are mesh guns, in accordance with the definition of that term by Congress. The appeal made by the administration was supported by a coalition of armed control organizations, which included Everytown for Armed Safety and the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Armed Crime. These organizations requested the Supreme Court to uphold the ban on bump stocks they had called for. As well as supporting the Supreme Court's decision to hear the case, Michael Cargill, who had previously submitted the initial lawsuit after handing over his 2 bump stocks in order to comply with the ban, made his support known. Cargill, on the other hand, is adamant that bump stocks cannot be classified as mesh guns.
And believe me, this rule has nothing to do with gun safety. This has nothing to do with making communities safer.
There are many areas, as you might imagine, especially when you're dealing with firearms, where we just don't know.
Democrats actually passed the Safer Communities Act.
Special order. Thank you so much for highlighting what's going on here.
The ATF, before they abolish our Second Amendment rights, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
The first piece of major gun safety legislation in decades, and we sent it to President Biden's desk.
He argues that the Justice Department is overlooking the considerable human input required to fire more than one shot from a bump stock-equipped semi-auto rifle. The meaning of mesh gun in Section 5845B is an issue on which national uniformity is needed. It is not tenable to have a regime in which the sale and possession of bump stocks are outlawed in some circuits while permitted in others, the attorneys for Cargill said in court filings. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.